Will it canon? That is the question. Hello, Watchtower Database, and welcome back to another episode of this show we do from time to time about whether or not a piece of superhero media falls in line with Bruce Timm's DC animated universe. It's called Will It Canon? God damn it, I tried so hard to say it right. Today, we're going to be discussing a topic that's been heavily debated in the DC animated fan community for a long time. That's right, we're talking about the 2003 Cartoon Network series Teen Titans. Back in July of 2000...
Nope.
Huh?
We gotta skip that one for a minute. The Fatal 5 movie just came out and people are going crazy over it. We have to cover it right now.
But I spent forever taking notes on Teen Titans and its companion comics. I studied the show every waking moment and every sleeping moment. Wait, have I even slept?
I don't care, and neither does the audience. They want the Fatal 5 video now, so you've gotta cover it.
But
the Patreon supporters even voted on it.
Fine. Let me see if I can find anything about whether or not this new movie is canon.
Adjacent story. So once we realized that was going to happen, we leaned into it, and I think it is. So yes, it's canon. There's your headline.
Well, that was easy.
Sorry, bud. The people need more than that.
But Bruce Timm just said it was canon.
That's not good enough, apparently.
Bruce Timm? The man who co-created Batman the Animated Series, the man who composed the visual style of this entire animated universe, the man who creatively guided the DC Comics world of characters for a generation and beyond, says the movie is part of his universe, and that's not good enough.
Correct.
Justice League vs. The Fatal 5 is the newest direct-to-video feature film from Warner Bros. Animation, directed by Sam Liu, written by Eric Carrasco, Alan Burnett, and Jim Krieg, and executive produced by Bruce Timm. When the movie was first announced back in July of 2018 at the San Diego Comic-Con, it was done so alongside several other upcoming animated DC properties, which made things unclear in terms of whether or not Fatal 5 would be part of the DC animated movie universe, DCAU, DCAU, a standalone film, or something else entirely. Once temporary poster art was revealed for the movie, it honestly just made things more confusing, reusing assets from the Justice League Crisis on Two Earths movie, which we analyzed in our previous episode. But by the time we got a peek at actual footage, it became clearer and clearer that this would be a return to the DC animated universe, or at the very least, a return to the distinctive art style of Bruce Timm. Now, look, we live in a world where other non-DCAU movies exist that have been presented in this same style. Superman Doomsday used the same design elements but restructured every character, recast every voice, and told a story that definitively did not work in the animated universe, despite being the first home release in the line of DC Universe animated original movies, very shortly after the DCAU's original run ended. Superman Brainiac Attacks reused character and prop models from Superman the Animated Series, as well as many of the voice actors, but was an out-of-continuity family tie-in to Superman Returns. Justice League Crisis on Two Earths started out as a DCAU project, but was retooled just enough to stand on its own, while still retaining much of its original DCAU DNA. And Justice League Gods and Monsters reworked Timm's art style into an Elseworlds-type reimagining of the DC universe, while mirroring the DCAU enough to raise the eyebrows of attentive fans. But imagine if we lived in a world where none of those movies had been made, where the only Timm-style animated DC content that existed on this planet or any other planet was purely that of the connected cartoon series and movies that ran from 1992 to 2006. We would not be having this conversation. It would be common sense that another new project in the same art style, with Bruce Timm and Alan Burnett attached, with a returning voice cast, and with returning music composers, was part of the same continuity. We wouldn't be doing somersaults around whether Justice League vs. The Fatal 5 existed in the same universe as its fountainhead Justice League Unlimited or not. But even though I love most of those other movies, that's not the world we live in. So strap in. Now, I do want to preface this evaluation real quick. When we analyzed Brainiac Attacks, it had been 12 years since that movie came out. For Crisis on Two Earths, it had been 8 years. But for this movie, for Fatal 5, It's been roughly 2 weeks. There are bound to be more and more bits of information, producer comments, additional content of various kinds that could add or take away from today's discussion. But the fact of the matter is, the movie is fresh. It's happening. It's now. And as the premiere or only YouTube channel dedicated to this universe, we have to talk about it, so we'll use whatever we can to do so. And to be honest, canonicity is such a hot button topic these days that the creative team has already provided us with a truckload of information to go off of. Well then, let's get started. Warning, spoilers ahead! On top of the blanket statement that the film is DCAU canon from the mouth of Bruce Timm himself regarding inconsistency in character portrayal, Wonder Woman voice actress Susan Eisenberg stated on her Instagram that it had been years since I last voiced this version of the character. JL Wonder Woman is by far my favorite iteration, and that she could not be prouder or more grateful to be voicing this Wonder Woman again on her Twitter. She went on to clarify,
"It's her from the Justice League."
In a WonderCon interview. Mary Ellen Thomas, Vice President of Warner Brothers Home Entertainment, Family and Animation Marketing, expressed her pride in having Kevin Conroy, Susan Eisenberg, and George Newbern reprising their seminal roles as DC's Trinity in the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated series, and believed that fans would be equally pleased with their return to these characters. And Warner Brothers' official press release for the film echoed that the Trinity voice actors were reprising their Justice League/Justice League Unlimited roles. Now, to play Hades' advocate here, it's pretty much understandable to take all of these particular quotes with a grain of salt, considering Susan Eisenberg, George Newbern, and Kevin Conroy have all returned to voicing versions of Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman respectively, sometimes in the same movie together and sometimes in their own solo outing. And as mentioned before, Tim Daly reprised his seminal role as Superman in Brainiac Attacks, which is decidedly not canon. In the weeks leading up to the film's debut, director Sam Liu and his team were noticeably hesitant to give an answer to any continuity or canonicity related question that wafted their way. When asked if he was directing an upcoming DCAU movie, Liu responded, "Yes, sorta, you're gonna get me in trouble." And when he was misquoted as saying it was in the DCAU, he replied, "Just to be clear, I never said anything definitively." Tiptoeing around the subject is understandable. You don't want to tell a Star Wars fan, for instance, that the newest piece of the franchise is canon to the larger universe unless you are absolutely sure that was the intention. Because for whatever reason, canonicity means a lot to us folks on the geek nerd gamut. Star Wars in particular has a long history of decanonizing and recanonizing characters and stories, making it extremely difficult for fans to know what's what, or in the case of the most dedicated fans, to maintain their attachment to the franchise. Therefore, Sam Liu writes that the internet can discuss and make its own conclusions. And that's just what we're here to do. We, the internet people. However, when the film premiered at WonderCon, followed by the official digital release the next day, things changed. Those associated with the project became much less reluctant to discuss the subject of canonicity. That weekend, Warner Brothers' official tweet announcing the release of the movie began with the assertion, "Justice League is back." Not the Justice League, Justice League. Like the name of the show, or the live-action movie. George Newbern, Superman, responded to whether he believed the film to be in the DCAU with, I do. And even Sam Liu referred to Fatal 5 as a JL continuity movie. "There are many factors even for Bruce," Liu stated shortly afterward on Twitter. "What it comes down to is, when Bruce is attached and it is in his style, he makes the big picture calls. It isn't for me to say officially whether a movie is or isn't in his continuity."
It's canon. It's canon. It's canon.
Watching interviews with Bruce Timm, you can tell the guy is fed up with the "is it canon" question. He gets it wherever he goes, and he just wants to tell a frickin' Batman story every once in a while. Whenever Bruce is forced to answer a question of this nature about any of his DCAU-style projects, it's more or less always the same kind of answer. To him it is, or he considers it to be. Case in point, a WonderCon interviewer managed to snag,
If you ask me, I would say yes it is. I consider it to be
continuity.
Now here's the thing. Even though Sam Liu, Fatal Five's director, pointed to Bruce Timm as the final word on canonicity, to play Etrigan's advocate again, there have been times when even Bruce himself has admitted to not being bulletproof in this arena. After the release of Batman and Harley Quinn in 2017, Bruce Timm told comicbook.com that, "I'm not actually in control of what's in continuity and what isn't, because there's been several other classic Batman animated style movies that I didn't have anything to do with, so technically they're canon even though I didn't have anything to do with them." Referring to, it seems, the likes of Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero and Batman Mystery the Batwoman, neither of which had Timm on the creative team, other than, well, a special thanks on Batwoman, and of course utilizing his character designs from the DCAU cartoons. There are a couple different interpretations of this statement. On one hand, we can almost now question the canonicity of Sub-Zero and Batwoman, which to my knowledge have never or rarely been questioned as part of the greater DCAU, as they debuted during the universe's original television run and often played on plot threads from the animated series. Well, okay, I do remember people questioning Mystery of the Batwoman at the time, but it seems to be widely accepted as canon nowadays. Oh, I can't wait to live in the future where the same goes for Justice League vs. the Fatal Five and Batman and Harley Quinn, but that future is probably always 50 years from now. Whenever now is. But on the other hand, while Bruce is saying he isn't in control of what's in continuity, insinuating that WB and DC are the ones in control, see previous Warner Brothers tweet, he immediately states that the movies he wasn't involved in are canon. This affirms that Timm's statement can be taken in a positive manner rather than a negative one. He's saying more stuff is canon than the ones that he works on. Not that what he makes personally is questionably canon. It's an inclusive statement, not an exclusive one. There's DCAU content that is in continuity that Bruce wasn't a part of, and there's DCAU content that Bruce did work on that he personally considers canon. So it all works out in the end. This all goes back to something I've stated in previous episodes of this show. A lot of this comes down to creator intention. Even though Justice League vs. the Fatal Five started off as a non-JLU style project, it quickly became one, and from the moment this fact started circulating through the interwebs, we got, at best, wishy-washy yeses, and eventually confirming does. Contrast that with Brainiac Attacks, for instance, which was described by writer Dwayne Capizzi as not intended to be in continuity with the Timmverse from the get-go. And it's clear from countless formal interviews, sit-downs, panels, tweets, and the like that Justice League vs. the Fatal Five is intended to be a part of the same universe as our beloved Justice League and Justice League Unlimited.
It's canon.
But there's one more thing I want to talk about before we move on. The word adjacent. Y'all remember that Robin that Joker killed? Adjacent Todd? Please clap. Adjacent, adjective, next to or adjoining something else. Synonyms, close to, near to, bordering on, attached to. When asked online in August 2017 if the movie Batman and Harley Quinn was set in the DCAU, writer Jim Krieg responded, "Let's call it DCAU adjacent." This one phrase has led to countless disagreements between fans. Some believing the statement to mean the movie isn't part of the DCAU and is something very separated. Others believing it to mean the movie stands right alongside the DCAU, just as its other movies like Mask of the Phantasm or Return of the Joker. It's a vague sentence, for sure. But fortunately, Jim also said some fun tidbits like,
"This is Kevin and Bruce's Batman from Batman the Animated Series. Batman is still Batman in this. The Batman we know from BTAS. This is the first time I get to work in the BTAS universe."
So it seems clear that Jim believes that movie to be set in the DCAU after all, meaning the word adjacent can be more applied to his statements on the movie's sneak peek featurette about how he recommends not showing it to your kids because it's more adult than the original show. I know, Batman and Harley Quinn is a completely different movie, but I bring it up because that word gets passed around so much that I felt like it needed clarification, especially since Bruce Timm himself used the same word when referring to Fatal Five, saying,
Really complicated series of events. We kind of backed into it, becoming a Justice League Unlimited adjacent story.
Adjacent, next to or adjoining something else. Just like every other piece of DCAU canon, Justice League is adjacent to Static Shock is adjacent to the Zeta Project. And now, with all that being said, and an enormous portion of this video dedicated to breaking down the basics, how about the damn movie itself? Fatal 5, to me, is a blast. It's a fantastic little story about personal struggle and becoming a hero, and it's a pure joy to see and hear the classic versions of these characters and their newbie comrades. But among the many delights this film brings, there are plenty of head-scratchers in the form of continuity errors. Let's start at the tip top of the movie. Where the hell is Nightwing? We're thrust into the prelim slammer in the time period of the Legion of Superheroes. Now that's a pretty broad term. In Superman the Animated Series, that meant 2979. In JLU, that meant the 31st century, aka at least the year 3001. And in this film, we come to find it also means the 31st century. So the big question on everyone's minds is, if this is roughly the same time period as their JLU appearance, where is Supergirl? She's not in the opening scene, she's not in Starboy's mind flashback fighting the Fatal Five, and she's not at the funeral at the end of the movie. Well, while we've yet to do our timeline video for this thing, it's not impossible to assume that the Legion's time period here is before that of their JLU episode, Far From Home. Writer Eric Carrasco clarified, FYI, we don't actually know that the 31st century action takes place after Far From Home. I know, time travel's wibbly wobbly. There's also the question of why Superman, who's seemingly living in a time after JLU's finale, wouldn't approach Brainiac 5 or other Legionnaires at the end of the film and ask about his cousin. Eric went on to say, Far From Home doesn't actually show Superman getting briefed, and he might not be allowed to know for space-time reasons. In fact, in the DCAU episode of STAS New Kids in Town, Canon, the Legion mind wipes Clark for that very reason. So for all we know, he's gone on many Legion adventures and just doesn't remember them. We definitely thought about it, is what I'm saying. So Supergirl might not be in the future yet, or Superman might not know all the details of her absence, or Supergirl is there, and we just don't see her for some reason, and Superman does know about it, but he simply walks up to nicer Brainiac and asks him about it after the film fades to black. There's many possible explanations. Stuff like this isn't pertinent to the story that the movie revolves around. And honestly, if the movie ended with Superman walking up to Brainiac 5 and being like, how's Kara? And he either goes, good, or who? Would the movie really have been better for it? We just didn't have room for her. Eric Carrasco. And along these same lines, shouldn't Superman, and by extension the Justice League, know who the Fatal Five are? It's likely they weren't allowed to know. Obviously John Stewart and Green Arrow know, but they weren't even allowed to bring their Legion rings back to present day. So it's likely they weren't allowed to talk about anything they saw either, should it butterfly effectify the time stream. Though, Superman does shout, "Great row!" when he first sees Mono, which begs the question, does Superman recognize Mono from the other Justice Leaguers' descriptions? Or is he just afraid of skull-faced dudes? I'm gonna go with afraid of skull-faced dudes. Superman's weaknesses are kryptonite, magic, and spoopy skeletons. And same goes for why the Legion didn't come back in time to stop Starboy from dying. They couldn't disrupt past events. If this is a fixed timeline, then Starboy always sacrificed himself to save the sun. The Legion couldn't very well keep that from happening, and it's a wonder their visit to the funeral was even okay. Time travel be cray-cray. Am I allowed to say that? The appearance of Miss Martian in this movie is understandably confusing. A good portion of Justice League was devoted to shoving in our face that J'onn J'onzz was the last of his kind, the only survivor of Mars' extinction at the hands of the Imperium, the singular being known as the Imperium who leads an army of white squishy aliens, to be clear. So then, how is there another Martian? We're never given an explanation for her existence in the movie, not one casual drop of J'onn's name, unless you count the incorrect subtitles, and she doesn't even glance at his statue in the Legion Museum. Now, we're likely to do an entire video on Miss Martian, so I won't get too deep into the discussion, but there are a couple of possibilities. Miss Martian, historically, in the comics, the Supergirl show, and Young Justice, is a white Martian. White Martians are, in most DC fiction, another race that inhabited Mars and waged a centuries-long war with their green counterparts, leading to the eventual extreme downsizing, or in some cases extinction, of the Green Martians, which resulted in J'onn J'onzz having a very similar origin story to his DCAU self. McGann was a white Martian who absconded from her malevolent race to masquerade as a green, until inevitably being exposed as her true self one way or another. However, attempting to apply the same history to the character in the DCAU?
That is the most illogical attitude.
For one, white Martians have never been shown to exist in this universe, and were conceptually replaced by the Imperium's drones in Secret Origins, Justice League's debut episode. But at the same time, it's not impossible that they also exist. It wouldn't be the first time that the DCAU gave us stand-ins for for characters and then turned around and gave us the real one anyway. Though we never see them on screen, they could have been inhabitants of Mars with the Greens, also wiped out by the alien invaders. In this case, perhaps Miss Martian escaped death just as Jean did. Or maybe in this continuity, Miss Martian actually is a Green Martian, and also survived without Jean knowing. It's happened before. Superman thought he was the last Kryptonian, until he discovered Jaxer and Mala in the Phantom Zone, and found another survivor of Krypton's explosion, albeit from a neighboring planet, in Kara Inze, Supergirl. This kind of thing happens in pop culture all the time. It even happened in Dragon Ball Z, or at least that's what Maddie tells me. I have never actually watched all of that show before.
For shame!
Or she could even be one of the Imperium's drones, allowing that unknown race to continue to act as a stand-in for the White Martians in the DC animated universe. We just don't know. Yet? But it doesn't take a lot of critical thinking to satisfy your own imagination in her case. And the fact the entire DCAU fandom demands an explanation just goes to show that the consensus is it can be explained. And again, as I've talked about before, new characters appearing without warning or reason is not unheard of at all. Case in point, most of the new members of the Justice League by the time of JLU. It just happens, and we have to accept it. It's not continuity breaking or a plot hole of any kind to introduce a new character without an overly expository explanation. Things happen off screen, and it's okay. We get a few appearances in this movie of the Metro Tower from Justice League Unlimited. The space station, as it had been since day one, was the Watchtower, while the Earth base was the Metro Tower. However, in this movie, members of the League referred to the Metro Tower as the Watchtower, which upon first viewing was a little confusing, even for me. But after some further thought, it's not really a problem. See, in the Batman Beyond episode The Call, our first introduction to a Justice League of any kind in this universe, a nearby citizen says,
"Just like in the picture, Charlene, the Justice League Watchtower, right here, right in front of us."
Which has always led me to believe that sometime between JLU and Batman Beyond, they stopped calling it the Metro Tower and started calling it the Watchtower. And when does this movie take place? Well, though we haven't nailed it down for certain yet, we're working on it. It does happen after JLU, which falls in line pretty well. But then again, in Epilogue, hashtag keep Epilogue a secret, like seriously, old Bruce said
you could meet him at the Metro Tower.
So is it the Metro Tower or the Watchtower? Is it both? Is it neither? Well, again, this isn't really an issue. Think of it this way. During JLU, there's two Watchtowers, one in space and one on the ground. We never actually hear any non-Justice Leaguers call it the Metro Tower, so Leaguers very well could be referring to it as the Metropolis Watchtower to be clear, or Metro Tower for short. I never thought I'd have to think that hard about this, but I guess I do. Next! True care, truth brings. Before we get to our last, biggest continuity kerfuffle, I want to cover some little things sprinkled throughout this movie that make me do this. What happened to the Emerald Empress's British accent? Not canon!
I'd hardly call capturing a Green Lantern a failure.
We can stop our enemies before they even start.
Characters change voice actors all the time in the DCAU. Hell, even Mr. Terrific has a new voice actor this movie. Harley and Ivy in the last movie, the entire Fatal Five in this movie. Even Superman changed voices like a dozen times. It happens. Why can Mono use only one Bernie hand in this movie? He could use both in JLU. Not canon. We don't know what happened between that episode and this movie, whichever direction that goes. Persuader's axe could also shoot bolts of energy in that episode. Writers can omit stuff if it better suits their particular story. Superman can survive in space? He always needed a spacesuit. Not canon. Yeah, he did always need one in the shows. I mean, except that one time when he burst out of the Watchtower to stop the big gun from going off, which he didn't really do a good job of. That was a pretty time-sensitive emergency, not really conducive to, hang on, let me put on this clunky spacesuit real quick. And when a big old eyeball is headed to destroy the sun, it seems like an emergency to me, bro. Superman can't make it to the sun that fast. Not canon! In Justice League's Eclipsed, it took the combined speeds of the Flash and Green Lantern's powering treadmill to allow Flash to reach the sun and toss in their Rammstein-Heisenberg machine to stop the Ophidians from doing a very similar bad sun thing. Superman himself even says,
"Even I can't fly that fast."
But now he can? Maybe Superman was weak from Snake People Diamond Dust? I don't know. This one's a little iffy, but it doesn't take me out of the story enough to worry about it. He's fast enough now because the writers wrote it that way. It's not the first time a character's power levels have been inconsistent, and it won't be the last. Shiera Hall is back on Thanagar? I thought she was banished! Not canon! It's heavily implied that there's some sort of Rand Thanagar war going on that we've not heard or seen anything about. Last we knew, the Gordanians had succeeded in destroying Thanagar's fleet, but that doesn't mean there's no people left on the planet, and it doesn't mean there's not a bunch of space stuff going on out there all the time that we have no idea about. Mr. Terrific also calls her Hawk Girl instead of Shiera, which, while that might not have any good in-universe explanation, I'm sure was written that way for first-time viewers who would have no idea who the hell Shiera is. Where are the Flash and John Jones? We don't get explanations for where they are. Not canon. Eric Carrasco mentioned to us that while he doesn't consider his word to be official, he personally sees in his head that Jean is off in this Rand war with John and Shiera, though I don't know why we wouldn't consider that official. He wrote the movie. If he told me Jean was off eating Oreos in Nebraska, I'd be like, sounds good. And frankly, I'm surprised we even get explanations for GL and Hawkgirl in this movie. There were plenty of episodes of Justice League where certain members of the team were just not there, and it doesn't matter where they were.
Wonder Woman is on another case. Superman's dealing with an earthquake, and Batman would only say that he's busy.
Typical.
Imagine if that's how every episode started. Okay, so Flash is stopping a volcano, Huntress is in the bathroom, Shining Knight is at the psychiatrist, Blue Devil's eating a sandwich in Canada, Plastic Man's down there. It's fine. They're doing something else. It's fine. Harley Quinn is a villain again, but she was good by the end of Batman and Harley Quinn. Not canon! In the sequel comic, Amanda Waller expects that Harley Quinn will be back as a criminal within 6 months. Fatal 5 is more than 6 months later, that much we know, and she's clearly villainous again by the Return of the Joker flashback. There's blood and cuss words. This isn't my JLU. Not canon! There was blood in Phantasm, there was blood in Return of the Joker, and they're not restricted to broadcast TV regulations anymore. They can do whatever they want. Well, except make an alien say the F word. Fart nuggets. Since when can Saturn Girl make force fields? Since when can Miss Martian stop a train? Since when? Shh. Since the writers wrote it that way. What happened to Arkham Asylum? It looks different. Oh my god, it's not canon.
The asylum had been moved to a newer high-security building.
And finally, this is the big one. Extremely dangerous. Keep out of reach of children. For the sake of time, and because we're probably going to do a whole video on this subject, I'm gonna try to keep my thoughts brief. Like that'll work. When Superman the Animated Series was on the air, all we had so far in terms of superheroic knowledge of this universe was A, Batman existed, and B, Superman existed. Sure, there were guest stars from time to time, like Zatanna or Etrigan or the Creeper, Jack Ryder, but there was no great expansive lore just yet, until the Superman cartoon started introducing characters like the New Gods or Aquaman, Dr. Fate, and eventually the Green Lantern Corps. Young Daily Planet artist Kyle Rayner became the Green Lantern of Sector 2814, and in one episode, STAS opened up the DC Animated Universe tremendously. We meet the Guardians of the Universe, we see Oa, we see several other Green Lanterns from other sectors, and as far as we knew at the moment, Kyle Rayner was the first Green Lantern from Earth. However, by the time Justice League aired, Kyle had been replaced by John Stewart, another Earthman Green Lantern, who, as you know if you've watched our Vanishing Point episode on the subject, was a Lantern for years before that Kyle Rayner episode. Eventually, we all came to accept John Stewart as we grew with his character, and as we came to know more about the Green Lantern Corps through JL and JLU. So when we have a scene like this, where it's revealed that Hal Jordan and Guy Gardner also exist, it's certainly immediately jarring, but it isn't universe-breaking. We were previously led to believe that Hal Jordan's cameo in the JLU episode The Once and Future Thing was due to temporal shifts from a different timeline. And while that may or may not have been the writers' thinking at the time, after Fatal 5 we can now infer that perhaps he is actually from the same DCAU timeline as John Stewart. John himself was out in space with the Honor Guard for over a decade, according to Dwayne McDuffie, during the entirety or most of Superman and Batman's pre-Justice League tenure, which is why they never would have heard of the Green Lanterns until Kyle Rayner's origin story. The point is, as with Miss Martian, there are things we simply don't know about this universe until we do. Hal and Guy could have been Green Lanterns at the same time as John, but off in space somewhere. Remember, there's a bunch of space stuff going on all the time out there that we have no clue about. Or after John, or who knows? But we know they did exist at some point, and according to the Legion's computer voice inside Starboy's Starbrain, they were all members of the Justice League. Kyle's costume being different here failure is also pretty much a non-issue. Characters change costumes all the time. Kyle wore a typical Green Lantern uniform in STAS, but had his own unique costume by JLU's The Return. We can easily assume he switched it to this 90s comic book looking one sometime after that. This ain't no Batsuit conundrum, that's for sure. Same with the look of the planet Oa or the Central Power Battery. They looked like this in Justice League, and now they look like this. And I'm sure the way the planet looked in the cartoons is not the same way it looked billions of years ago when the Guardians first settled there. So what about old Arcus Chummock here? Is he not supposed to be dead? Looks pretty dang dead to me. But then again, referring to Bruce Timm's old quote about a character not really being dead unless we see them cremated, although this is pretty close, there are a number of ways he could be back. It could be a Red Skull situation where it looks like he died but he was just sent to a different place. It could be a Superman Hereafter situation where it looks like he died but he was just sent to a different time. Or, and this is a bit of a stretch, it could even be that this isn't Arcus Chummock, but another Lantern of his same species like Barir Watt, who may have taken over for Arcus after he indeed died. I mean, we don't see Gallius Zed in this scene, so I'll assume he's for reals, he's dead too. I miss that little dodgeball. Oh, and Kilowog? You say him being based off the Green Lantern the Animated Series model is a big issue? Is it a big issue that the Joker changed designs multiple times? Is it a big issue that Swamp Thing looks different than he did in his cameos? No, it's not. It's an artistic choice, just like cheekbones, just like batsuits. Sure, they could have easily used the correct model from Justice League, but they didn't. So now, Kilowog looked like this in Superman, and this in Justice League, and now he looks like this. But James, you might say, these are all just things you're making up. There aren't actual explanations. Kilowog alone means this movie isn't canon. Well, while I do my best to base my inferences off of things we do know to be true in official canon, I fully understand that stuff like Arcus Chummock got sent to a different place, or Miss Martian is a Secret Origins alien, is certainly headcanon. Stuff I'm making up that fills in the blanks to the best of my ability. But the thing is, we're given matter-of-fact word that Justice League vs. the Fatal Five is canon to the DCAU, and so discrepancies found within it have to have creative explanations to explain them as decently as possible. I am by no means the final word with Purd on this stuff, but I can at least assure you that nothing in this movie is impossible to fit into the greater universe. I keep coming back to this, and I'll come back to it until I die, but when Brainiac Attacks was created, it wasn't meant to be part of the DCAU. There were no restrictions. They could do basically whatever they wanted with continuity. They were making their own news stories set in its own new canon. Fatal 5, however, is supposed to be a continuation of JLU, a continuation of the DC animated universe. So anything weird that pops up has to be taken as, well, that was interesting, and we move on with our lives. It may sound like I'm sweeping stuff under the rug that I would have concentrated harder on in the past. And there's a lot of guesswork that goes into this kind of thing, yes, but that's kind of the beauty of new canon material. The more I think about it, the more I like that we have new information about this universe. And to be honest, it's a lot more fun to see something questionable and think, let me see if I can figure this out, than to immediately jump to, not canon! But canon is becoming a four-letter word these days. Oh, you know what I mean. Like I said earlier, it's clear that Bruce Timm is exhausted on the subject. No one else wants to answer the question unless they have a definitive answer for it. And as Eric Carrasco put it, I'm really glad Bruce cleared it up because I'd love for people to feel free to enjoy it or hate it without the distraction of the canon question. And that's what it really comes down to. At the Watchtower Database, we do our best to approach these subjects with as little personal investment as possible, except that damn yellow batsuit. I, for one, love this movie, but my positive or negative feelings on it do not affect its official inclusion in the DC animated universe. The story is what's important. The characters, the events, the emotions, the investment you as the viewer experience because of a good story. Whether or not something is canon is not nearly as important. Before the movie even came out, that's all everyone cared about. Is it canon to the DCAU? Well, the answer is a resounding yes. But even if it wasn't, it's still a hell of a good movie. And Bruce Timm, if you're watching, we appreciate you leaving things up to the fans. We appreciate you entrusting your beloved universe to the capable hands of us hardcore super nerds. But please, in the future, just make a DCAU thing and say that that's what it is. We'll gladly accept that, because not only will that make everyone more excited for its release, not only will that keep people from asking you the most annoying question in the world, but it will make me stop having these terrible nosebleeds. Can someone call a doctor, please?